Welcome to This Weekend Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector, Kolonas, and LaRosa.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Weekend Coworking podcast feed. I am Hector Kolonas, and I am joined again today by my co-host Mike LaRosa, and you are listening to the weekly recap for week 21. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's so good to be back. Quite a large amount of content you dropped in those 2 weeks that I was away. So well done, Hector. It's nice to be back in the routine and chatting about the week's news with you. We've got a pretty chock-full newsletter this week, don't we?
We do, and in this week's episode, we're actually going to talk about the shift towards fractional office management as a service. We're going to talk about why maybe hiring teachers is the best strategic move for co-working spaces. We're going to dig into why members leave your spaces silently and what to do about that. And then we're also going to dive into what One Co-working Alliance is doing in August and why you should start thinking about August as well. And then we're going to dive into some data from both the UK, Ireland, and Sweden. So quite a jam-packed episode today. Before we dive in, this week's sponsorship slot is actually used by our Undercurrents team or Undercurrents section. We're building a new Undercurrents report currently. It's going to take the next 30-ish days. We're going to dig really deep into what are the additional new revenue channels that co-working space operators and flex space businesses around the world are adding to create even more revenue per member, add more value, but also really subsidize or stabilize their revenue stack. So if you are doing anything interesting at all, whether it's selling parking spaces, walking people's dogs, partnering up with laundry services, whatever you're doing that's bringing in non-traditional flex-based revenue, please reach out to us. Go to thisweekendcoworking.com, click on week 21, and click on the button to apply to tell your story. And we'd love to feature you and your space in the next Undercurrents edition. On that note, we're going to jump right into this week's first story. So we did see a pretty interesting story around a company called Veery. It's interesting to me, especially because it was actually created by two leaders at a previous co-working space called One Piece Work, where during COVID, they were watching what was happening with their business, and they created a new entity or a new offer to provide what they call fractional office management, which is essentially allowing a non-co-working space, a startup or a growing business, access to someone to manage the office, manage the kind of amenities, offer sprucing it up, making it a destination for employees to go to without having to hire a full-time office manager. Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
I think this is pretty smart and it makes a lot of sense. Over the last decade or so, we've seen a massive growth in the fractional, like CXO or insert acronym here, right? Whether it be marketing, financial, operation. I think a lot of it started probably in '08 with a lot of folks maybe being let go or laid off and went out on their own. Having worked for a couple different startups, I've encountered and been one of those types of people that, hey, listen, you might need some specialty in this one area, but you don't need a full-time salary. So it's pretty much leveraging development and technology and access to talent and the ability to work remotely. And I think that this is super cool. This is an enterprise grade service that the big guys would typically provide to the blue chip or the Fortune 500, and no different than having a fractional chief marketing officer. This is just a fractional office manager. And I think it's really smart for companies to maybe consider this to alleviate, because I do feel for a lot of folks in these like chief of staff roles, it's like everything in the kitchen sink, right? In charge of the meetups, they're in charge of the board decks, they're in charge of intermediary HR issues. This just makes sense. Why don't you just outsource it to someone who has the relationships and the knowledge as to what works? And so it's interesting to see how far that line goes, if that also includes the liability of the space, as their expertise helping the startup with the space that they've chosen.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting. And going back to this whole idea of fractional, a lot of folks are like, what's the difference between fractional services and a freelancer or a consultant? I think the main, at least from what I see, and I'm a bit biased because we do offer at Syncuru a fractional CIO service. But I think the main difference is instead of hiring a single consultant, you're hiring a team for a fraction of what that one person would cost. So you get economies of scale. For example, our CIO service supports operators of various sizes across various continents, but we're able to do so because of the economies of scale of sharing our team's resources and learnings and technology across our customers. So it's a win for the customers, but it's also a win for those operators, for ourselves, because we're able to scale that without having to split up one person's time necessarily. We can share that load across our team and scale that up as we need. Now, on the service management office or office management fractional side, they're not the only game in town. Recently, we talked about Cody shifting into the space, going from an office booking type of platform into more of a AI-driven office manager platform. We saw Tandem shifting towards this, not only helping you find the space, but helping you fill it, design it, stock it, maintain it, clean it. So it's definitely a growing element, but I don't think any of these folks were first. I remember speaking to Jerome Chang from Blank Spaces maybe 5-6 years ago, and he's like, why aren't we just releasing our or renting out access to our expertise to people who are not renting space from us? Essentially doing office management as a service, which is essentially what this is. So Jerome was definitely ahead of the curve there, hopping over to the other side of the world. Tashi Dorji has said this is what they're doing in Australia, right? They're putting a co-working space at the bottom and the ground floor of the basement for the other underutilized spaces. And then they're licensing access to those, not only amenities, but to the services, the cleaning, the office management, the stocking of snacks, the community engagement to the rest of the tenants in the buildings, creating additional revenue streams for those co-working spaces while making the building a bit more sticky. So just a really big trend that we're seeing. Maybe this will have to be one of the last undercurrent trends that we do this year, is digging into this additional boom and opportunity for co-working spaces licensing their team out as opposed to their spaces out. So it's going to be a really interesting shift I think we're going to see, but good to see that this is a burgeoning industry with 3 tech-enabled companies driving innovation in this side.
Yeah, I think that's important that we focus on the tech-enabled phrase, because I really do feel like this is part of a tech-enabled ripple. Services like this, like these 3 that we've highlighted here, wouldn't have been able to been possible a few years ago. So they're just leveraging developments in technology and other aspects in commercial real estate. And I think that there's a great need for it. There's a great opportunity. And with anything like we've seen in the aggregator submarket, there will probably be at some point a consolidation. So I think it's exciting to watch. And I'm sure is going to be the place when news breaks, and this it's the best place to stay posted on what developments there are in this field.
Absolutely. You just said that kind of you're going to be like mergers and acquisitions. I just popped into my head that there was an acquisition in this space 5 years ago when WeWork acquired Managed by Q,
Yeah.
right? Managed by Q was this concierge level kind of office management fractional service who got acquired and pulled into WeWork back at the around $20 to $40 billion valuation that WeWork was sitting at the time. So
Yeah.
it's definitely something that it makes sense. And I completely agree. There will be roll-ups here. There will be some mergers and acquisitions, and we will definitely cover all of them. So definitely subscribe to This Week in Coworking wherever you're listening to this, or head to thisweekincoworking.com and grab the free newsletter. We put a lot of love into it, and we send it out every Thursday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time.
I was about to say, speaking of pouring a lot of love into things at 6 a.m., teachers are often early risers. And that might be one of the best parts about considering that the teacher or former educator for your co-working space. But Hector, you flagged this post from Josh Dane of Runway East, and he had participated in a recent Flexible Space Association conference, which has made this newsletters multiple times now. So that's telling me that maybe we need to attend next year's conference. There seems to be a lot of great dialogue coming from the FSA over in the UK. But Josh talked about his own transition and how he was a rogue candidate, and how kind of the operator of the space took a chance on hiring him. I'm a big believer in taking a chance on rogue candidates, as having been a former rogue candidate myself once or twice. But what are your thoughts, Hector? How did this strike a chord with you?
Yeah, I definitely think we have to get down to the next, I think it's called Flexa, that's what they call themselves, to the
Yeah.
FSA conference down in the UK. What I loved about just the coverage that we put out from this week is the content seemed to be a bit like confrontational and not just same old, but also highlighted different elements of what makes our industry so unique. And many times we've talked about how co-working is the ideal transition for someone in a hospitality career wanting to move away from like late nights, looking after hundreds of rooms at hotels or unruly passengers or customers in cruises or restaurants. But this idea of bringing in teachers makes so much sense. And having spoken to Josh, who was featured in the previous Undercurrents, it now makes even more sense. Not only, as you said, they're used to rising early and having to deal with bureaucratic, sometimes things that don't make sense. They also have to deal with tantrums and they have to deal with navigating scenarios where you may not be able to just sit down and have a conversation as an adult, which, as we all know, if you've ever been in a co-working space for long enough, these situations do occur. So a very
Yeah.
valuable skill set there. But I do love the fact that Natasha at Runway East took this bet, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more hiring from non-traditional hospitality industries as people look to make career changes. We know that teachers are undervalued and underpaid. We know that they're great at what we do. I wish we could put more people into teaching because our kids need great teachers, but makes total sense that they're looking for another type of community. They're used to dealing with obviously parents as well, who are who are a little bit more neurotic in that environment. And I can say that as one. No one cancel me, please. So that is definitely a very interesting development. Now, also looking outside of co-working, we're seeing BlackRock and others shift away from hiring the kind of traditional hiring routes and hiring people with history and other majors as opposed to finance or tech for those tech and finance roles. So I think this is going to open up a whole new avenue of amazing people coming into our industry. And I'm happy that Josh got on stage and made that case using his own example.
Yeah, when I think about what teachers do, it's such a not I would say similar role to community managers because they do so much more beyond what the title of the role says. When you think teacher, you're thinking simply instructor, but in many ways, a teacher is a guidance counselor, they're a moderator, they're a recess monitor.
Yep.
They do a lot to foster a genuine sense of belonging. And that takes us to the next post that we've got in the newsletter. Big fan of Twick, and we're a big fan of him, Bernie Mitchell. Love what he writes on LinkedIn, and he shared kind of things to keep into consideration when understanding why members stay or why they leave. And it brought up a really good point. Like people would always, when I talk to operators, sometimes they'd be surprised. Yeah, they'd be surprised if someone didn't renew their membership or would be a little taken aback when they dropped. And what Bernie's saying is that there's often ways that you can see how people respond, where maybe they used to be 4 times a week and now they're coming in once a week, or maybe they're coming in half a day a week. And it's like these social cues. People are not going to walk up to you as an independent operator and say, "Hey, I'm not really enjoying this space." They're just not going to return. And so it was very interesting to get his take on what are things that you can do, or what are things that maybe you're subconsciously doing or not doing that can help sense to create and foster more of a sense of belonging, which is more difficult to do, as I think some operators start to learn as they grow. And
Mhm.
as operators experience success, running a one location business is a lot different than running a 3 location business. And I think sometimes this is one of the things I used to hear operators say that they struggled with in the scaling process.
Yeah. And Bernie hits at home with this idea of kind of the fact that some members, those who pick the space themselves or pick that community themselves, are looking for what he calls the minor acts of social repair, right? Those small moments that make people feel that sense of belonging, make them feel seen, make them feel wanted and part of a community, which is very rare in almost every other circle of our lives. So it's a reason why so many people pick specific co-working spaces. But he does highlight some very interesting points, and it goes back to what you're saying about scaling, right? There's a lot of change in the way our businesses run, the type of products we sell, the people we're hiring, the tech we enable. And often we think about tech-facing prospective or new members, not how it serves the current members. So how many times have you been in a space when like they've changed the technology and it's okay, now you have to go through this 7-step booking process to get the same desk that you used to just walk into and sit down at, because now there's corporate and is a bit more popular and there's a new community manager or something like that. And that we don't think about the cognitive load it puts on people who just want to come for that community. They want that place of belonging. They want that somewhere to just get away, escape from their home routine and get some work done. And they won't ever stay in because it's not something you would complain about, because you can't really identify. I'm not leaving the space because you made a booking process. I'm leaving the space because on top of everything else, on top of the fact I have to do the laundry and go fetch the kids from school and kind of invoice that client and figure out how to file my taxes and all the other things, on top of all of that, booking the desks is just too much. And so I stopped coming in that often. I stopped feeling that social connection. I stopped that social glue starts breaking down. And then I get to a point where I'm like, I might as well sit at home. I can get more done. I can do those other tasks. And that's where we lose the members who need our spaces the most. So absolutely happy and glad that you highlighted this one, Mike, as one of the ones we should talk about. It just is something that we need to keep discussing and keep thinking about how the rest of our decisions are impacting those members who need the community more than they need the desk and the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of community, International Co-working Day will be here before you know it. And there's, I think, a couple great ways to build community, but one of them is by leveraging International Co-working Day and these types of group activities. And the San Diego Co-working Alliance shared two things that they're doing. So they're doing a whole co-working week, August 9th through the 16th. And they are also pulling together a pretty cool AI reinvention innovation, which is basically a promotional campaign to bring education to a variety of different spaces and market that to the public. So if you are thinking about what you want to do for co-working day in August, the time to start planning is now, and follow their lead and rally the troops in your local market. And I'm very keen and very excited to see what other markets and cities will do. So here's the call, is we're putting out the call now. Get your plans together and share them with us so we can help spread the word.
Yep, absolutely. And definitely, yeah, as I said, share them with us. We can spread the word, but also we've discussed this idea of, are day passes or free day passes a good or bad idea? Do they convert? Do they not? We had Graham Clark from Baseworks also submit a link this week talking about how some of the best benefits of co-working are better felt and seen than put in an email or sold through a video or through a website or through anything like that. So I'm still a firm believer that group collectives like this, that elevate, that co-working isn't just about one brand, isn't just about one type of space. Going back to kind of Craig and his co-working passport, where you would visit any of the space and they'll be like, that's great that you want to join here, but go and see 2 or 3 other spaces before you join here so that you make the right decision. Things like that are just going to build stronger bonds with the people who do pick your spaces, especially if you're in a collaborative environment where there's an alliance like this, where you're all working together. There's so much more to win by getting people into the right spaces if you're all working together. But talking about obviously the co-working day mentality or the co-working week mentality, we just saw 200 plus spaces across Europe take part in European co-working days. So I'm still waiting to see the results from that, but it's just great to see more and more groups of spaces banding together and opening their doors to be like, you've heard about co-working, but come and try it out. Come see what it looks like. Maybe reach out to that journalist who thinks all co-working spaces are filled with terrible people and be like, come in and see what co-working is like at a Runway East, at an Industrious, at a Downtown Works, whatever it is. See that there are different flavors and choose the work ecosystem that works for you. Because we also have to remember that folks aren't just picking one co-working space anymore. They're now picking a network of different third places that will slot into their life as they get through their work schedules and do different types of work.
All right, we are going to dive into some co-working data. I know that's something that a lot of folks look forward to, and we're always jumping back and forth and back and forth. So we haven't touched on Europe or the UK lately. So Hector, there's some data here that comes from our friends at Co-working Cafe. Yet again, it's another quarter. They've got updates. And what's the big number that the UK and Ireland has hit now?
Yeah, so we actually had two data sets out of the UK, one from Coworking Cafe and one from Rubber Desk. What was good to see is we saw growth in supply on both sides. So it's always good. We love to kind of correlate data from different aggregation platforms to see if they're telling the same story. So jumping over to Coworking Cafes data this week, we've now this quarter, we've now passed 4,000 co-working spaces across the UK and Ireland. That's up from around 3,326 last year. We're now at 4,090. So quite a big jump of how much supply is available in their main markets that they're tracking. Just to break those down a little bit, 3,335 of those are in England, England proper, 291 are in Scotland, 119 in Wales, 84 in Northern Ireland, and 261 across the Republic of Ireland. So just a pretty good spread. It's worth noting that 30% of the UK's co-working spaces are in London, followed quickly by Manchester, Glasgow, Birmingham, Edinburgh, Bristol, and Leeds. So we're seeing that spread that we've talked about fairly often here, which often pushes down the average price because not everyone can charge London pricing, but that does not mean that the actual pricing is dipping. It just means we're seeing more of a regional spread into the second, third, fourth cities, and that's balancing out now. Talking about prices, we did see that the median kind of open plan space in the UK is sitting about £175 a month, while a dedicated desk sits at around £248. With what was interesting, I actually found from this report is Brighton and Hove saw the highest rate for dedicated desks, so surpassing London at around £300 a month. As on the VO side, the virtual offices are averaging at around $50 a month, £50 a month, and meeting rooms sitting at around 27. So just good data to get a feel for what the UK market looks like. Just from that overview, now jumping over to the other report from the UK, we did see that Rubber Desk reported that the supply had increased by 32%, so very much close to what we're seeing from the co-working cafe side. But what they wanted to draw attention to is the fact that managed offices, which is in between that spec suite and full co-working offering, actually surged by 111% year on year from the same quarter last year. So that is pretty big numbers. And when speaking to Tom at Rubber Desk around that, he attributed to two things. One, tenants want more private flex services. And two, landlords are able to move their long-term leases and are now shifting into offering more flex managed services to meet that demand where it is. So just huge numbers coming out of the UK. Before we jump over to Sweden, Mike, any thoughts around the UK numbers?
Well, the Rubber Desk data tells me that there's no coincidence that we had another story about a service like Viri and why there's more of those services popping up because that falls right in line. And I'd say that it's really great. I always appreciate how Coworking Cafe can give us such segmented data because it really helps us better understand moves in the market. And once again, always you reminding us not to follow always the top line number, but try to understand. I'm not surprised that Brighton and Hove had the highest rate because they more than likely had the least inventory and probably the fastest growing demand because they're in those tertiary markets. And I think Oxford would lead on hot desk. That's a natural kind of correlation with the fact that it's a major academia market and students are more likely to probably be a hot desk type user versus corporate employees are probably to be looking for their dedicated offices. So yeah, really great numbers and really appreciative for all of these companies that publish the data that they collect. It's pretty insightful. And that takes us to Sweden. There's coming out from, I'm going to butcher how you pronounce it, but it's yet to, so it's yta.se. It's a Nordic aggregator. Not quite sure how you pronounce that. Hector, do you know?
I have no idea. I just know that
Okay.
they were acquired by Insta Group, so I'm calling them YTA.se until someone
SE.
corrects us.
Okay, sounds good. So they basically acknowledged that they had data that shows that the co-working industry in Sweden has doubled in size over the last 5 years, that it represents 7% of Central Stockholm's total office stock, and that while the revenue grew, losses widened significantly with only 58% of operators turning a profit. So I wonder why that is. When you think
Mhm.
of these Nordic countries, Sweden in particular, you think of highly efficient, effective, social minded types of cultures. It's interesting that they be struggling to turn a profit. There's a percentage of all operators out there that are in that scenario. Try to make light of it. I was a little surprised that the number was that high.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. And I'm just going to make assumptions. I would love to dig into the data more with YTA. If anyone there wants to reach out, we'll love to have you on the podcast and dig into this data a bit more. But just assuming that the probably higher CapEx costs, so setup costs must be higher, a more premium service. I think the businesses there are looking for that more high polished look, which is the higher setup rate cost, higher salaries, higher wages, more kind of people, less automation. All of these things play into a higher, not only CapEx, but OpEx expenditure, which may be why we're seeing those numbers. It may be also that I think a whole bunch of local operators are funded by their real estate arms, that OpCo, PropCo, maybe not really chasing profitability or high revenues at this point, just solidifying the model, how it is implemented, but also just ensuring that it plugs into the rest of the strategy of the propco. That may be what we're seeing in the local market. It did say that the industry has doubled in size over the last 5 years. So we might see that point where, over the next 5 years, we start to see that profitability number go up, and we're going to see a lot more M&A just at that point of maturity right now.
Great insights.
Talking about kind of maturity, we did see that IWG announced two interesting stock related updates this week. They announced that they're going to do a share buyback, buying back around $50 million worth of shares from the public market, as well as paying out a dividend of around 90 pence per share, which brings their total 2024 dividend to £1 and 33 pence, or is it one? It's one pence and 1.33 pence per share, not £1 per share. So that's up 1 pence, up from 1 pence last year. So an extra 33.33 pence per share. For those who are not holding any IWG shares, I'm not personally, but if you are not, what does that mean for the rest of us? I love seeing public disclosures because it tells us a little bit more about the numbers behind the scene. So the company did report that they had a group revenue of about $3.7 billion over the last kind of 12 months ending December 31st. That's a flat year on year, but what they did report is that their EBITDA, and not the magical community adjusted EBITDA, actual hard UK EBITDA, was sitting at $557 million. That's up 11% from last year. So even though their total group revenue was static, their earnings after tax, depreciation, and interest was actually up 11%. So pretty strong numbers coming out of a public company. We don't have many public companies. I think we have two in the UK and a few more spread around the world. It's always good to have a look at that and use that as a slight barometer for what the industry is actually looking at. They're showing bigger revenues or static revenues at a higher profitability. So I think that's a good sign for everyone in the industry. So looking at our time, there is a whole bunch more to read in the newsletter. So we can't touch on all of them, unfortunately, but please do go over to thisweekendcoworking.com, hit on week 21, have a read of this week's report, have a look at the news from across the co-working world. And if it tickles your fancy, definitely subscribe for the free newsletter. It arrives in everyone's inboxes on Thursday at 6 a.m. Eastern time. And we love putting these out on Fridays, talking about some of the biggest stories that caught our attention. Mike, anything you want to leave folks with before we log out for today?
Yeah, just one little shout out. One of the first people I met in the industry, Felena Hanson from San Diego. San Diego's getting a lot of love this week. She was actually named the 2025 Women in Business Champion of the Year by the U.S. Small Business Administration. This is a major honor and award out of all the women in business in the country. Felena was selected as like the honoree. For those of you not familiar with her Hera Hub brand, it's really a great initiative. It's a female-focused co-working space, and congrats to her. I know she's done a lot of work in both the industry for flex workspace and co-working, as well as being a champion for women business owners. So that's a major win. Congrats to her.
Massive congrats to Felena and the Hero Hub team. And it's great to see co-working represented at the top championships of successful business. Great to see that. Thank you, Mike. Thank you again for joining me this week. Thank you, everybody, for listening or watched this. Crazy stat from last week's numbers. We saw 25% of people watching our recaps on TV, which just blew my mind. I'm sorry for doing this in high res. So we look forward to being back in your feeds same time next week. In between then, we'll have some more drops, but please subscribe and drop a comment and let us know what you think. Take care, everybody.